Even so, every good tree bears good fruit, but a bad tree bears bad fruit. A good tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a bad tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Therefore, by their fruits you will know them. Matthew 7, chapter 7, verse 17 through 20. All right. Welcome to another morning episode of the Liberty Dad podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, I want to especially thank you for giving me your time so early. So today, this week, actually, I'm going to do things a little differently. Think we're going to have several random dad musings. That's just where I pick a couple different things and I talk about them rather than go into one topic more in depth. The reason for that is because I do have a side hustle aside from podcasting, which would be my actual job. And things are kind of busy right now. So it's taken a little bit of time away from me being able to dedicate to reading and grabbing resources and putting it all together and trying to make it, organized in a way so that it makes sense. If you listen to yesterday's episode, you've probably seen that it wasn't at my best, and that's because I've just been kind of swamped with things, and so trying to pull it all together and get it organized, and then being prepared in order to deliver a good and meaningful show that is insightful and has lots of resources and citations and all this good stuff, right? Like that was a bit of a challenge yesterday, so I kind of was winging it, and I don't really like that. So the easier thing for me to do is, well, I've got one of two choices, right? I can say, okay, well, maybe this week I won't do podcast, or which I don't really like that idea because I like the idea of like if I tell you Monday through Friday, then I'm here Monday through Friday starting at 7 a.m. I am working on the whole 7 a.m. part. And that's partially because putting things together can be a bit of a challenge. And it's hard for me to gauge whether or not, okay, this topic, can I really put it together in 2 hours or do I need like two and a half or three? And so that's become a bit of a challenge. Sometimes I bite off a little bit more than I can chew. And then I'm kind of rushing to put it all together. So that's what's going on here, folks. If you're watching the show, I very much appreciate it. And I just want you to know that I'm doing my best to deliver a certain level of quality because you're tuning in, whether it's live or whether you're tuning in at a later time, like you're listening to the audio podcast or you're coming back to YouTube or you're coming back to Rumble later. and you're like, hey, you know what? I didn't have time to, I was busy trying to get ready for work and leave. I didn't have time to listen at 7 a.m. But on my lunch hour, I can listen or what have you. You're giving me your time, and so I want to make sure that you get some quality. So that's what's going on. So so expect to see random dad musings, like 19 through whatever the rest of this week. And that will also help me to resolve a few things. Like I didn't realize the music. I don't think you guys are hearing music at the very beginning. Well, like a little wait screen. And there's something weird with the audio setup, and I don't know why, but the music isn't coming through. And it's like really it sounds like a radio station that's not coming in very good, but without static. So I don't know. I got to try to figure that out. So there's a bunch of things that we need to do to improve so that this show is of high quality. Because I want you to be able to recommend it to your friends, and I want your friends to come back and say, "Wow, that was very insightful," as opposed to, wow, it sounds like he had some good ideas there, but maybe he should spend more time preparing and the show sounds like junk and yada yada yada. We don't want that. We want to deliver quality so that you won't be embarrassed to recommend the show to your friends. And so that's what we've got going on. So expect a little bit of out of the ordinary this week, and that will, I think, get us through, and then we can move along as I normally do. All right. So what do we have today? Well, I actually only have two items, and I think they're going to take up a good portion of the time. So we'll see. That's another thing that I want to point out. My goal is to make this a show between 7 and roughly 7:45, maybe 8 o'clock. So be working very, very hard to make sure that happens. A lot of moving gears we're trying to get put into the proper place and consistent. But at any rate, I've got two topics today. Let's talk about the first one. So I made this. Sometimes I get on social media and I'm just in a mood, not like a mean mood, not like trying to get on to people or anything, but I'm just in the mood where I want to say something that's kind of like somewhere between humorous, serious, a little snarky, right? And, I guess you could just call it trolling. Like I just like want to troll, just kind of see what the responses are. So I did that, and the responses were like, okay. I think people recognized, where I was coming from, but it was, I think there's something to talk about here. So let's put it up on the screen. So Austin Peterson, who also does a morning show, he does his at 8 a.m. Eastern time. So basically right after my show. He says you could afford to be a stay-at-home mom and not work if your men weren't taxed at 38%. Instead, you voted to take care of other people's families instead of your own. And then I just came along and I said 38% is a small is but a small price to pay for a civilized society. And the running joke here is when libertarians talk about taxes and how taxation is theft, people often say something like, well, taxes are the price you pay for a civilized society. And so I was just kind of making a joke like, man, we're actually paying, 38%, only 38%. And look what we get. We get a civilized society. But the reality is, are we? And that's a good question, right? Like nobody really second guess that. Or at least the people that like to say that phrase, those who like to say, well, you get a civilized society. That's the price of taxes. Those folk, they don't turn around and say, you know what? Is this society really all that civilized? I mean, we like to think we are because we're not like the stories of lore, the Vikings and the barbarians and all those. We're not that. So therefore we must be civilized. I mean, we got running water. We're civilized. But maybe we're not nearly as civilized as we like to think we are. Maybe we've just kind of covered it up. We've covered it up with running water, right? We've covered it up with a number of things. So let me play this clip. And the clip comes from Marcus Reeder, who, if you follow the show, you know that Marcus Reeder was a vice chair here in Duval County, here in Jacksonville, and he has recently passed away. And I played this clip in a memorial to him about a week ago. And I'm going to play this clip again because it bears repeating. In fact, I'll probably play this clip again at some time in the future. I don't know. but it's one of those clips where it's always good and there's always some insight to get out of it. So let me go ahead and play this clip, and then we're going to talk about this whole taxation is theft, and then whether or not we live in a civilized society. So let's go.
Libertarians say taxation is theft, and we say it often.
We do.
We say it on principle because there's always someone taxed against their will. People pay taxes because they are forced at the point of a gun, not out of choice. We also say taxation is theft because the government has a tendency to seek unnecessary expenditures, often with an effort to limit expenses. For example, agenda items 11 and 12 collectively seek $175,000 to establish projects funded by NHTSA through FDOT. NHTSA, of course, gets money from taxpayers. But read the stated purpose. Both agenda items read similarly. The Impaired Driving Enforcement Project. Funds will be used for a variety of project expenses, including overtime salaries and benefits for law enforcement officers, running lights for unmarked vehicles, and maintaining a message board. But then from the Speeding and Aggressive Driving Project, funds will be used for a variety of project expenses, including overtime salaries and benefits for law enforcement officers, and to procure radar and laser equipment. That sounds like what JRSO funding should already include. Those aren't new projects with new needs. What are current taxes going towards if not to maintain JSO and their equipment to do already existing jobs they have? You may argue it's only $175,000, a fraction of NHTSA's budget, but imagine all 67 Florida counties receiving that. That's over $11 million for new projects that read like what citizens expect already funded. Imagine the taxes citizens wouldn't have to pay if just local governments stopped asking money for things citizens already expect to be funded. 6 cents here, 6 cents there, 85,000 here, 90,000 there. It adds up. Even when spread across everyone else, the Libertarian Party will always believe taxation is theft, but at least make the argument more difficult to make.
Thank you. All right. So I love the comment that he made at the very end. He's like, look, at least make the argument more difficult to make. And I want you to think about it. Imagine if we weren't taxed at 38%. Imagine if we were taxed at like 8% and we still got roads and we still got fire and police and stuff like that. Imagine how difficult it actually would be for libertarians to say, well, taxation is theft, especially if in our near recent history, we were being taxed at like 38, 40% or whatnot. I want you to think about that. Like if you're listening and you're not a libertarian, just think about that because libertarians are like, well, I could still make it. And I would say the same thing. But if you're a non-libertarian, I want you to think about like how difficult would it be in your mind to accept, okay, taxation is still theft. If we went from 38% to something like 8% or even 18%, right? Drop 20 percentage points. Imagine how many people would be like, look, we dropped it 20 percentage points. Why are you still complaining? Right? You would make the argument harder. Now we would still make it because that's how libertarians are. And it would still be theft because at any time that you're taking money from somebody that's against their will, it is theft. The only time it is not theft is if I willfully give you that money. Now let me and what I like about taxation is theft is that it's a radical statement, but it's also one that it's one of those radical statements where you can easily bring people into a regular conversation. So let me explain myself. So Marcus said something about 6% in there. So here in Jacksonville, there was a measure for city council, and they had voted to increase we had a 6 cent 6 cent gas tax, and it was for 20 years, I believe. And they voted to extend that one for 10 more years. And then they voted to add a second 6 cent tax for 30 years. And they did this because there's all these infrastructure projects, and blah, blah, blah. And I had went to oppose this, and I went to a town hall, and it was around the time when there was a lot of controversy on social media about like New Hampshire and some other notable individuals who were saying really, really radical things. And people were like, you're going to make it harder for us to sell libertarianism. And that's not what I believe, and blah, blah, blah. Right. So people were getting really, a lot of libertarians were getting really angry. And I had kind of come to this conclusion, and I said, maybe the problem is that we have different camps within the Libertarian Party, and each camp has only learned how to talk about things that are spoken from their camp, right? So if I'm like if you're not listening, think about it as the radicals. We're just going to try to put some labels on it for people that are not insider party knowledge member havers. That's really that's got to be a phrase of some sort. So if you're not familiar with the Libertarian Party, think of it as you've got radicals who are just saying some of the wildest things, and then you've got you've got people that are more what's the word? I'm drawing a blank on it. Um, oh, uh, I had it, and I lost it. Dang it! That's not gonna go well. Um, Give me a second, and I will try to think about it. I need some sort of like music or something I can hit, kind of like a Jeopardy type music. I'm gonna work on that. Um, okay, we'll just call you radicals and non-radicals because I can't think of the word that I want to use, and if I think of it, I will maybe insert it in, but it's just not coming to me now. So imagine you got radicals and you got non-radicals, right? And the radicals are saying some of the most craziest stuff. They're like taxation is theft, and other people are like, okay, well, we believe that, but we want to say it a little differently to make it a little bit easier to digest. Okay. And so I said, well, maybe if you're in the non-radical camp, the problem is that you haven't learned how to manage a conversation that has been started from the radical camp. And maybe if you're a radical, you haven't you haven't learned how to take a conversation and work with it that came from the radical camp, right? And yes, biblical anarchy, you nailed it. There it is. Pragmatic. That's the word I was looking for. So if you are a pragmatic, let me repeat that now with the right terminology that I wanted. So if you're a radical, you might be the kind of person who has not learned how to take a comment that was started from the pragmatic camp and run with that conversation, and then just kind of drive it. And if you're pragmatic, then the same thing. You might not be prepared to deal with a comment that starts from the radical camp and drive that conversation, right? So if somebody comes up to you and says, you're a pragmatic person, and somebody comes up and says, well, I heard this thing, and that thing came from the radical camp, then you're going to be like, oh, no, what do I say? So what I wanted to do was I wanted to challenge myself, and I said, okay, well, can I say something radical and then end it up where I'm speaking more at a pragmatic level? So I'm at this town hall, and the town hall again is about a 6 cents gas tax. Two of them actually, 2 6 cents, 6 cent gas tax. One of them is to extend. One of them is a brand new one. And so I started out, and I don't have the clip of it. I should have grabbed it, but I started out and I said, I announced myself. I'm like, I'm DL Cummings. I'm chair of the Libertarian Party here in Duval County. And then I said, anybody that knows anything about libertarians knows that we say taxation is theft all the time, and we mean it, right? And then I said, and then this is where I made that switch. I said, I'm not here to yell fancy slogans. I have an actual question that I would like you to answer. And so then I just swung it around, right? Like I just said, like, hey, we've got this phrase. We totally mean it, but that's not what I'm here to do. And here's what I'm here to do. And so then I asked them for evidence that the future Jacksonville wouldn't have projects that were outstanding, that they would have to come back and say, well, we need more money because turns out that 6 cent gas tax wasn't enough. By the way, the answer that I got was as you expected. They were like, "Oh, we're totally going to get all that money, blah blah, whatever." So, and they didn't have any. And I asked them specifically for evidence. Actually, I said, "What evidence do you have?" And they never provided evidence. They just were like, "Oh yeah, we're totally going to get a lot of money." And that was their argument. It was a dumb argument. Now, that's not the important part, because the real important part was as I was leaving 2 women walked up to me and they said, "Hi." They said, "Who did you say you were with again?" And I said, "Well, I'm with Libertarian Party." And they were like, the look on their face said, "We don't know who that is." And so I said, "We're the 3rd largest political party in the United States." And they said, "What was that thing you said about taxes?" Boom, right there. It was like like it was amazing. And I was like, "Well, taxation is theft." And they're like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And so then I was like, this was my opportunity, right? So I took a very radical comment and then now I had this opportunity. So here's what I said. I told him, I said, "Well, there's 3 of us here." I said, "Let's say that 2 of us decide we're all voting on a new tax, just like we were talking about." And I said, "Let's say 2 of us say no, or I'm saying 2 of us say yes, and 1 of us says no." And I said, "Well, under our current system, we win. We get the tax. But this person said no. So therefore, we're taking it from them against their will, right? They may have participated, but at the end of the day, they still said no. I don't want my money taken. So if we take it anyway, we are stealing because that's what it means. Tax it. I said the only way that taxes would not be theft is if 100% of the people gave on their own volition. Therefore, that's how it would not be a tax. And they were like, "Oh, wow." Now they didn't turn into libertarians. They weren't like, "Oh, let me go change my registration and all that." But that was how I had this conversation. And so I think, we can have these kind of conversations about taxes and about anything really. And I think we just need to start one, getting comfortable with however the conversation starts. It doesn't really matter. And learn to have a little bit of fun with it. So let's go back and let's take a look at that comment that I had made. Let's pull that back up on the screen there. You could afford to pay a stay-at-home mom and not work if your men weren't taxed at 38%. Well, that's a great comment. And I think it's pretty relevant now. Right? There's a lot of people that are like, "Man, it would be great to be a stay-at-home mom." I know plenty of women who are like, I would prefer to be at home. That'd be kind of fun, or at least have the opportunity, right? Maybe they might say, "Okay, well, I want to be at home, but maybe I would like to do something on the side as a actual side hustle so that they could choose, right? They could get a little bit of break from being that stay-at-home mom." And then when I come along and I say, well, 38% is but a small price to pay for a civilized society. Well, now let's go back to that and let's say, are we really a civilized society? Well, let's think about it. Number one, we're taking money from people that don't want their money taken right off the bat. Like that's a big deal. And then on top of it, add insult to injury. We're in many ways not providing the services that they thought they were even gonna get. So we're taking money and then not even providing the value. Because a lot of people say, "Well, what about the roads?" And I'm like, "What about them?" Like, I don't even live in Michigan, but I'm gonna tell you right now, I could go out and within walking distance, I could find potholes in the road that need to be repaired that would, they may not do horrendous damage to a car, but they would do, they would wear down on a car, right? Like, they would like cars are, they have a suspension and all that good stuff. But that's not necessarily that, like, they weren't designed to just drive all over bumpy roads forever, right? Like, that's going to wear down on a car. And in fact, within walking distance of my own house, our own affiliate, like 2 years ago, we filled in this pothole and we got like a whole lot of, um, like it really went well on social media. So what was funny about it is it's within walking distance of my house, and I live in a nice neighborhood. Um, this pothole was actually pretty big, and when we went and we identified it, and then we came back like 2 weeks later, and it was even worse. And as we were digging it out and cleaning out this pothole, because what we were doing this thing where we're like, all right, we're just gonna go fill in a pothole because we didn't have any candidates running at the time. We didn't have a lot of things. So we're like, we're just gonna pull this out. We're going to clean it up. We're going to take a bunch of pictures. We're going to take some video, and then we're going to try to, give ourselves a little bit of a name here, right? Like just by doing this pothole thing. And as we were working on it, we put cones up, and we looked kind of sort of almost official. And as we were working, this woman stopped and she said, "Hey, I want you to come and look at my car. I just drove on this last night. Look at the damage it did." And she was like, well, who can I call? And she's like, she thought we were city workers. And we weren't actually, because we're just the Libertarian Party and we were just trying to do something good in our neighborhood and kind of give us some boasting power and whatnot. And so she thought we were city workers with the city, and her car had been damaged. And she showed us where the car was damaged, and we took pictures of it. And and we did our best to guide her, like how she might be able to go to the city. And I think our city offers up to like $100 reimbursement, which is pretty much nothing. And I'm pretty sure that the damage I saw was going to be more than $100 to repair. Um, and like, if you had ridden over it in a motorcycle, like, you could have potentially gotten seriously hurt, right? Like, it was that big. So think about that for a second. Just in the context of, we're taking people's money and then not providing services. Like, that doesn't seem very civilized in the way that we think. Then we get into some more, serious issues, like going to war, the violence that we see all throughout our cities, right? There's all kind of gun violence. I mean, like, every city has a side: north side, west side, east side, whatever. They've got a side. They've got somewhere where, if you don't live in that neighborhood, you probably ought not go. Okay. But we have taxes, right? And aren't we getting a civilized society? Well, how civilized is our society if we literally have sections of the city that it's unwise to go to if you don't live there? And in some cases, it's really not wise for people to live there, right? That's not really all that civilized. So we can look at all these different areas, and no matter which way you want to slice it, because I know some people would say, well, the government's really trying hard and they want to provide it. It's the thought that counts. And so maybe they would exclude the idea of taking money from people and not delivering all the services, because it's really, really hard. But then there's other areas. So it doesn't matter how you want to look at it. We're not really as civilized as we like to think we are. And you've probably seen some of those pictures, like our roads and then like Roman roads. Now, I don't know if those pictures are true or not, but it does seem like some of these older cobblestone type roads have held up better than some of our own roads. And so, yeah, like, I just look at it and I say, like, if we're going to take money from people, and this is me as the more pragmatic person speaking, if we're going to take money from people against their will, we damn well better offer them, or provide them the services that it's being taken for. And so, like in that video, Marcus is pointing out, he's like, well, you're trying to pass more, you're voting on a measure for new projects. And when we look at the new projects, it's literally a description of what we would expect, because we expect the police to be funded. We expect the police to have training. We expect the budget to already cover any overtime necessary. So the idea that you're going to add two measures, not just one, in that case, two measures, and say we want out of state, or not out of state, but funding from the state for these new projects. And these new projects are literally just like operating, standard operating procedures, because overtime, like, that's like that. No, like, if we hire an officer and we need them to do a job just like any other company, they need to be able to pay for that person with the budget they already have. Like, the company I work for would never hire somebody and then go to their investors and say, well, can we get some more money so that we can, pay for DL's overtime that, he's going to, like, that's not how it, like, they have to work with the budget they got. Right. And that's how it works. But instead, the government, they do it quite the opposite. They're like, oh, well, looks like we got all these things we need to do. We're going to have some more money. And it's like, well, no, you've already been given a budget. Work with that. And the fact that you keep taking and keep taking and keep taking, and you're not delivering. I mean, even the mob did better than that, if the mob had ever actually existed, of course. But, like, that's not civilized to take from people and then not give them what you said you were taking it for. I just don't call it civilized. So, and then it only gets worse from there. So even if you want to exclude that, like, fine. I've got example after example after example. And so I think this is an opportunity for us to just really think about the arguments that we're making as libertarians. And then I think it's a good, if you're not a libertarian, I think this is a good opportunity for you to really consider and be like, okay, what are we really getting? Like, do these statements hold true? Or are there some failures that really need to be addressed? And I think in this particular case, to Austin's point, 38% being taxed does mean that we force families to be two income earning homes, whereas maybe they might not want to be. And I mean, we don't need a study, we don't need research to realize that when you have two working homes, the children that are in those homes don't get nearly as much of mom and dad as they should. And so I think, what he said is a great comment. And I think there's a long conversation that we could come out of just this comment right here. Like, there's so many things that we can have a regular, everyday, normal conversation with people about and say, look, what if it were at 28%, 10%, 10 percentage point reduction? What if it were at 18%? Now we're at 20 points reduction, right? Like, what would the society look like then? Rather than 38%, and I can find deleterious potholes within walking distance of my home. And I don't live in a bad part of town, although it shouldn't matter. It really shouldn't matter. What Like, we have a nice area. I don't live in the really nice area, which is called Ponte Vedra here in Jacksonville. Um, I suspect that Ponte Vedra, because it's a very nice area, they have, like, they would be more hard pressed to find potholes, whereas the north side, which is the bad side of town, you're gonna find a lot more potholes. But the reality is, you are taking money from people, and the north side and Ponte Vedra they should have the same level of difficulty finding a pothole in the road, if we wanna call it a civilized society. But it's not really all that civilized, because the rich people, they're gonna have a much tougher time than the poor people, because that's how government operates. And so it doesn't really operate on any level of what I would consider civilized. But even if you excluded that, well, we could go on further and we could talk about war and stuff like that. In fact, since we want to talk about war, let me pull up my next clip here. This next clip is of Dave Smith. So Dave Smith is responding in this video to a man named Coleman Hughes. And Coleman Hughes, I don't know a whole lot about him. In fact, I don't know anything about him. I just know that apparently he has this very like stoic, s- uh, level tone delivery that comes across is very like almost like thoughtful, as if like, okay, this guy said everything that needs to be said. Um, but he's talking about the issue in Gaza. He's responding to a whole bunch of things in Gaza, over there with the Israeli Gaza conflict. And there was something that I noted that was very interesting about what one of part of Dave's response, and it ties in with something that I said previously. So where I'm going to go with this is talking about moral equivalency. So you've heard the argument about moral equivalency, and anytime you suggest that maybe we're bombing too much, not we, but Israel is bombing too much over in Gaza, people are like, oh, you're making a moral equivalence. And the argument goes like this: if you don't condemn Hamas way more disproportionately, very clearly disproportionately to anything Israel does, you're making a moral equivalence. That's basically the game that they're playing, and it is a game, I think. But I think there's something interesting to point out again, and I've pointed out on my podcast, but I want to point it out again because I think it bears repeating. So let me pull this clip up from Dave, and I've cut it up a little bit, and I have the link in the show notes. You should go watch the whole episode. I think it's a very good episode for sure. Dave always does a great job. But I did clip it. So just so we can, and all I did, I didn't actually clip Coleman's response. so much as I did a little bit of Dave, just to kind of reduce the amount of clips that we're playing here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this. Know that it's a little bit clipped, but we're not losing any context whatsoever from Dave or Coleman for sure. I only clipped it enough so that I would cut out some of the stuff that's not where I'm trying to go. So that's what we've got right here.
Any nation that suffered what Israel did on October 7th, everyone in the country would be saying, you have to go get these guys. You have to eliminate this organization that did this. And if they're 80% finished with that job, it would make no sense at this point to stop before you've cut out the last 20% of the cancer.
You know, at first where he's like, well, we don't really know about these numbers. Now he's just accepted them as fact and said, oh, 80% of Hamas has been wiped out. Listen, first of all, this is all nonsense. There's been absolutely no evidence to show for this. This is just the government of Israel asserting something. They just asserted the total number to begin with, and then they asserted the number that they've taken out. The idea that we're operating with it, 80% of them being taken out as fact is just not in the realm of reality. But even if that were the case, I mean, just think about the mindset here. I mean, you've taken out 80% of them. What sense does it make to not take out the other 20%, right? Like, what argument could there possibly be? Oh, yeah, here's a really easy one. You're killing babies. Like, I don't know, how many images of babies being killed have you seen since this war started? I've seen many more than I needed to, okay? So that, first of all, that would be one argument against it. What sense does it make? Well, you know, you wouldn't be slaughtering all of these innocent people, which never seems to come up. It always seems to be that in that the foundation that what every pro-Israel argument is based on is that those babies just don't matter as much. It just don't matter as much. You would never be making this calculation if it involved innocent Israeli babies getting slaughtered. Well, what sense does it make to stop now? We're almost done. We'll just keep, I don't know, another couple thousand of them got to die, whatever. Another, you know, few tens of thousands more, and the collateral damage outside of that and the second and third effect, you know, deaths. That's all right.
Okay. So he's, you know, he's responding to this argument like, hey, they're 80% done. Like, might as well continue on. He's like, well, the same argument applies that we've been complaining about, which is you're killing a lot of innocent children and women, right? Women and children. And specifically, a lot of people that are not of the age to have voted for Hamas. And we're not going to get into the details of Hamas, but there's a lot of people that are dying that have no opportunity and have had no opportunity to change their government, right? So it needs, and there's a lot of them. We're not talking like, again, this is very similar to the argument with the taxes. Make it harder for us to make the argument. If you were only, if instead of tens of thousands of people being killed, there was like 50, like imagine if there was just 50 innocent Palestinians killed altogether. Well, it would be much more difficult for libertarians to make the argument like, hey, you're killing innocent people, because it would be like, dude, it's only 50. Like that's like crazy low for this for this level of a conflict, right? But that's not the case. And I think these things kind of tie in, right? Like, are we a civilized society? Well, we can see some of the same lazy arguments being made in two different areas, right? Like, okay, well, it's only 6 cents. Okay, but it adds up after a while. Well, this bombing campaign only killed this many. Well, it adds up the more that you keep bombing, right? Like, the more that this continues, it does add up. At the end of the day, the totals matter. But where I really want to go with this is attacking this moral equivalency argument, which I've attacked in the past, and you can go back and you can look. I've got several podcasts where I've talked about this issue, and the big problem is that is Dave is correct, and that's not really in itself the problem. The problem is that he's correct in saying that people are treating the other side differently, right? Like, they would never make that same argument if it were Israeli babies. They're only making it because it's Palestinian babies. So let me play a clip again from the Candace Owens Rabbi Barclay interview or conversation where she brought on Rabbi Barclay to have a conversation. So I want to play this clip, and then we're going to kind of really we're just gonna we're gonna see where it goes.
There is no moral equivalency. What Hamas did is evil. It is not a tragedy only, it is evil. I'm sorry, Candace, but you make an equivalency that does not exist in most people's minds, and certainly in no Jews' minds.
Okay, so I'm glad that you said that so people can hear what I actually said and hear what you are saying and how you are taking it.
Okay, so at this point, they're in the middle of a dispute, and she is saying, like, look, you wrote this article about me. You said this thing about me. Here's a video clip where I actually said quite the opposite. And so they're having a dispute at this particular moment. There was no good, clean cutoff point. So they're having a dispute on whether or not she had condemned Hamas. And she showed a video where she's like, of course I condemn Hamas. Who wouldn't? It was totally barbaric, right? Something like that. But she literally said, "Of course, I condemn them. Who wouldn't?" Those were almost verbatim words, exactly 100%. And then she made some further comments as well. So that's what they're in the middle of. But I want you to hear where they go with where the conversation goes.
I don't know how you could write this statement. She refused to condemn Hamas when I literally said who would not condemn these horrific
You
events.
don't condemn them uniquely evil. You put them in pari passu relationship.
So you're saying that even though I did, so now you're admitting that I did condemn Hamas. She refused to condemn Hamas.
What condemnation is? Is this where you really want to go? Is having
Actually, it's kind of where I want to go. So I want you to hold on to the thought about condemnation, because we are going to talk about that in just a moment. So keep that thought like right about here in your mind. Okay.
No, you wrote she refused to condemn Hamas. These are your words.
Because when you put that, at the moment you say that they have a moral equivalency with anything else, that's not condemnation. No matter.
I didn't. I said it's sad when an innocent.
It's not condemnation. And
Okay. So again, he keeps repeating this idea of condemnation because that's what's important. Okay. And I want you to think about it. Think about a lot of the moral arguments that you hear today about anything. Condemnation. People just want to hear condemnation. So in this regard, in this particular context, they just want to hear condemnation about Hamas. And that's actually about all they want to hear. My producer woke up. He is here. I got to be on my best behavior. So they want it. That's all they want, right? They want to hear condemnation, but you hear it another way. So right now on social media, there's a lot of people flipping out about this red-haired chick who was an OnlyFans star, but now she's converted to Christianity, or converted back to Christianity, I guess. And it's like all people want to do is just hear condemnation about her. Like, oh, she's not for real. Oh, look, I think I've seen some people suggesting like, oh, she didn't take the videos down fast enough. She didn't, she's got a new clothing line deal, like all this crazy stuff. Like all they want to hear is condemnation, right? Even in our own party, the Libertarian Party, right? I keep finding people that are like, okay, well, did you condemn this person? And I'm like, okay, well, my job isn't just to run around and condemn people, right? I do more than that. I actually want to see real change, but I feel like it's very popular in society. So this is not a Jew thing, right? This is a people thing. People like condemnation. They just want to condemn people left and right. And there seems to be no room for grace. And you don't have to be a religious person for it necessarily. You could just say, hey, you know what? There is a limit to condemnation, except for politicians. There's really no limit there. But otherwise, there is a limit to what condemnation can produce. And more importantly, if you get caught up in condemnation, I think it allows for people to it allows people to ignore the sins of their own group or groups that they support. And we're going to see that in just a second here.
I'll just ask you a question. Is it sad? Is it sad? Sure.
Sit there and do that.
I don't want to cut each other off, okay? Because clearly what we are having here is just a disagreement. There's no reason to get angry. Do you think it is sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies?
Okay. You've probably seen this clip before. It was going around a while. I've played it. Other people have played it. Simple question. Do you think it's sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies? Now, the answer ought be yes. Okay. I want you to hear his answer. It's in two parts, right? He says it and then follows it up again. I want you to hear what he says.
Candace, I cry every day And it's not just for Israel. And this is one of the things you clearly do not understand. The same way most don't, who are anti-Semites, who don't get it. I cry for what's going on in Israel. I cry just as much for what we are forced to do.
Okay. So twice he could have just said, yes, it is sad. But instead, he gets emotional. He locks up and he's like, I cry every day. Okay. We didn't ask you that. I cry for every day for what's happening in Israel. Okay. Not the question. The question was, is it sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies? And he didn't say yes, right? He didn't even talk about the Palestinian child. He went right into Israelis. Then he follows it up with, well, I cry for what we're forced to do. Like, we have to do this. So at no point does he say, yes, it's sad that an innocent Palestinian child dies. Now, I know people were splitting hairs and they were like, does he really cry every day? I don't care about that. Like, I'm sure that he was engaging in a little hyperbole. We all do it. I'm not worried about that. I am worried about what he actually said in like his actual response to the question. And he could have again, he could have made the argument for us libertarians harder, but he didn't. Mask off. He said, what he could have said was, yes, it is very sad. I cry every day about it. I wish we didn't have to do it. Now, I wouldn't have accepted that so much, but it would have made the argument a little tougher, right? But he didn't. He went right into, well, I cry for what's going on in Israel. I cry for what we're forced to do. And then he follows it up with a quote.
Golda Meir had a great quote. She said that one day we may be able to forgive them for killing Israeli children. We will never be able to forgive them for making us kill their children.
Okay. So, by the way, I'm not going to go into it too much. You can look at my episode where I talked about their conversation. That quote, it looks like it never existed. Actually, it looks like it was never said. That Golda Meir never said that. And he misquoted it anyway. So it actually was rather than saying what did he say, children, or it was I think the original. When you go back and you look up the quote, there's a book that was written by Golda Meir, and it was edited by somebody else, and this is a quote in there. And then when you start digging in and you start looking to see if that quote actually existed, based on the source that it was that references it, it turns out it wasn't there. My previous podcast, I point that out. I also used some. Trying to think of the article. Was it like the? It was a Jewish newspaper that serves the greater New York area. That's where somebody had went and they went to different state departments and they did a freedom information request, and they were trying to find the source of this and they were unable to find it, and they surmised, I don't think that she said it. In my own research, I could not find anything that suggested that she said it. So it's a totally inaccurate quote. It's a totally made up quote, it appears. And then not only that, if you if yes, if you were to go and look at the actual, sorry, I got a little distracted there. My producer is asking me a question. So if you go back and you look at the book that it was written in, that's not even the quote. The quote is actually our young men. So it's kind of suggesting that the original quote might have had to do with sending our young men to war. So he's inaccurate on that. I just wanted to make that quick point, just because it was in there. But more importantly, let's go back to this moral equivalency issue. So you're not allowed to make a moral equivalency. And a moral equivalency in the minds of people that use that argument is that you're not condemning hard enough. Well, what happens is when you condemn so hard, you get to the point where, as Dave Smith said, it doesn't matter. The Palestinian babies don't matter. And so what I've said is that, correct, there is no moral equivalency because they those who don't those who use that argument don't view it as immoral to kill innocent Palestinian babies, but they do see it as immoral to kill innocent Israeli babies. That's a problem. That is a huge problem. And I think this is a result of when we're so busy condemning that we're so busy condemning the other side that our side kind of gets a pass because we get into this mindset where they're the worst ones, not us. Which in this particular context is kind of weird because that's exactly what the Pharisees did in the Bible. They were busy saying, and there's scripture, literally scripture, where they're like, where Jesus is like, don't be like these guys who go out and they make a big show about how they pray and how they were so much better than everybody else. Blah, blah. Like there is scripture about this very point. And I think this is related again to the original thing that I talked about, which is, do we live in a civilized society? Well, on the low end, if you will, based on how we tax people and what we deliver, no, we don't. But on the high end, on the higher moral end, if you will, we're at a point where it's very common for people. And again, this is not a Jew thing. This is a lot of people thing. It's all over. A lot of people will make this argument, Jews and non-Jews alike, and they will say, you're making a moral equivalency. And they're like, well, we need to condemn these people, and we need to condemn them so much that there's not much room left to condemn the Israelis for when they do something that should be seen as equally as abhorrent. And it should be seen as equal. The reasons why people do something, sure, we can have a debate about that, right? We can have a debate and say, and I would probably agree that the reason that Hamas went and killed a bunch of people is much different than the reason that, some innocent people might get killed in a bombing attack, right? Like those are different reasonings, but the end result is still the end result. Innocent people have died, and we should see that equally as abhorrent. I don't like it's, and I feel like this is we can measure all of American society in this same way. Because I want you to think about it. We're talking about like hate crime laws, things like this, right? Like there's all these things. And it seems like we're in a society where people would rather condemn everybody else rather than try to maintain some semblance of equal moral footing. Right? They're condemning so much that some people get a pass. And we see this everywhere. Like, pick anything, pick our presidents, right? Think about Donald Trump. When I was growing up as an evangelical Christian, Republican evangelical Christian, right? That's who I was. We voted Republican. Republicans were the moral party. It was an outrage when Jim Baker was sleeping around on his wife. These were big, huge deals, right? And somebody like Trump in my mind, I think, would have never made it as a Republican. But now he does. Right now there are Republicans that are basically wrapped around his pinky. And morally, in terms of just, his sexual impropriety, and we don't have to go into crazy stories of like, was he with these Russian prostitutes, or like, we could just be like, look, the man cheated on his wife, right? the man said some things about women that are pretty vulgar that we would have never accepted once upon a time. But now here we are. Here we are, and we're busy condemning the other side so much that we forgot to condemn our own side. And we forgot to say, no, we demand better. I mean, think about it. To my knowledge, at least in his personal relationship with his wife, Ronald Reagan was far beyond Donald Trump. I remember story after story about how Ronald Reagan and Nancy Reagan had just this great relationship, side by side, couldn't pull them apart. the perfect marriage, if you will. Now, I've heard some weird rumors. I've never been able to substantiate them, but so everything that I've heard that seems to be legitimate has been that they had a fabulous relationship and they remained married for decades until the day that he died, right? And then we have Trump, and I'm not dissing on people that have been married and remarried and whatnot, but he's been married multiple times, and it seems like the reason for that is not just a simple, hey, it wasn't working out. A lot of it's, at least some of it, seems that he had, improper relationships with other women was kind of at the driver, right? So like, it's not like he got married and man, and we butted heads all the time and it just wasn't working and we were always fighting with each other. Like, it's not that. It's the man was a scumbag when it came to relationships, interpersonal relationships with a significant other. That's what it sounds like. But we're so, you've got, so, and everybody's guilty. Like nobody is exempt. Like this, the Republicans, but then you've got a lot of the people that are on the that are on the left. They'll have their thing that they complain about ad nauseum, right? Like you could just pick anywhere in society and we can see this level of, we must condemn to the point again that we're not condemning our own side. And I think this is the argument that we're really not as civilized as we like to think. We're civilized in the sense that we have running water. We're civilized because I can go down to the local grocery store and pick out, a jar of peanut butter among 40 different jars, right? Like that's what it means to be civilized in this society. And we're paying 38% taxes for that. And then we don't even have the opportunity in many cases for one person to stay home and maintain the household and work with their children. I mean, some people are in a good position and they can, and that's great. And, like I am, I work from home. My wife's a real estate agent. So we have, a bit more opportunity than most, but many people don't have that. And they're paying, whatever taxes, income taxes, sales tax, just tax everywhere. It's all over the place. Right. And they pay all these taxes and they can't even get a friggin' road. Like they could probably tell you at least 2 or 3 places right off the top of their head. Hey, there's a road over there that I actually have to kind of move around when I drive because there's a big pothole and I don't want it to damage my car. Right. Again, on the low end, but then on the high end, we've got people that are like, well, you're making a moral equivalence and they may not be saying it directly, but what they're really saying is these particular innocent children and women, they don't matter, because what really matters is as long as we condemn this person who is really the bad guy. So you have these two extremes, which would be, I don't want to say it would be nice, but we would be maybe a little bit better as a society if they were only the extremes. But unfortunately, you find it all throughout in between. It's rampant everywhere. So no, we don't have a civilized society. No, we shouldn't pay all these crazy taxes. Even if you agreed to taxes, you should be able to at least acknowledge and say, you know what? We're not getting what we paid for. And that's offensive, right? And we should be able to say that. I've actually said it in the past. I worked for a company and I was really angry because they were continually asking me to do more and more and more. And finally I got mad and I said, look, you're getting a service you ain't paying for. I literally said that. I'm no longer with the company also, although I did leave on my own accord. But we need to learn to say that to our own government and say, we're not getting what we're paying for. Knock it off. We're not paying for innocent people to get blown up and to be killed in the tens of thousands, right? We're not paying for damage to my car. That's not what we want to pay for. I don't want to pay 38% so that my spouse still has to go to work so that we can feed the family and, and have a decent life for however long we're on this chunk of dirt, right? Like Nothing anywhere is really what we should accept as we're getting what we paid for. We're not. And under no circumstances would I argue that we're a civilized society. So that's my show, folks. Let's see. We got some comments. Where's my mouse? There it is. Let's see what we got here. Let's see here. What do we got? I'm trying to scroll through. Doesn't that sound like an abusive spouse? Why did you make me do this? It does. It's very abuser-like language. We would never tolerate that in somebody. If I were to say, if you were to be like, DL, do you feel sad when you beat the piss out of your son? Which I don't, but let's just assume. If somebody said that and I go, I cry every day for what he forces me to do. Imagine that. Like, you'd probably want to punch me in the face. Like, seriously? That's your answer? You beat the piss out of your son. He's afraid of you. And your answer is you're sad that he forces you to do it? Right? Like, no, it's very abuser language. Absolutely. And we would not and should not accept it anywhere, period. Two wrongs don't make a right. You are correct, Keith. Absolutely. Let's see what we got us. Let's see what else we got here. I'm trying to think of ones that aren't really out of context here. It looks like there's some conversation going on. Love the musings, big dog. Thank you so much. Jordan, by the way, I'm not really all that big. I'm only 5'3", 120 pounds, but I will go ahead and take anything that elevates my stature. So, but just so everybody knows. All right, folks, I'm going to end it out. I've got to go and take care of this family. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. By the way, just as a reminder, once again, this week I'm probably going to do a whole bunch of dad musings instead of a single topic where I go in depth, just because I don't have the time right now to research. Got a lot of things going on with work. So, got to make some choices, but I still want to bring you a good show. So we'll be doing that. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. ish. I promise you, I am working so hard to get started 7 a.m. on the dot, right? That's my goal. And I told my family the goal is to be done by 8, not 8:15 or 8:30, like I have been a few times, which really butts me up against taking my son to school. Producer's got to go and get his education. But anyway, Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. ish, join me for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you are subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com. You can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, please, just if you are a new subscriber or you've been watching and you've never commented before, while you're there, throw me in a comment and let me know how I'm doing. I would love to hear from you. Last but not least, I want you to remember that if you are a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But